Gustavo, it's great to have you here. We have a lot of questions, and the audience might even have some questions later. So can you tell who the entrepreneur is and who it's not? And can you tell who lives in Montana and who doesn't? So why don't we start a little bit with maybe just telling the audience a little about yourself before we get to the company. You know, where'd you grow up? What makes you tick?
Well, I guess I'll answer in the context of entrepreneurship.
Right.
I always aspire to do my own thing, and in the context of doing my own thing, doing something worthwhile. And what's interesting about that, and particularly relevant to the moment in time we're living with all things generative AI, is the world sort of celebrates incrementalism and status quo. And challenging status quo is hard. And a little bit about myself will be precisely that. I derive a great deal of joy by poking into the eye of status quo, which means you're unemployable and therefore you gotta go start your own company.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up a bit all over the place, mostly in Florida, some time in Chile. Now I went to school in Chicago. And now I split my time between Montana and New York City.
Very good, very good.
I came from Montana. That's why I look the way I do.
I could tell. So let's talk about the company, ASAPP. When did you found the company, and maybe tell us a little about the journey of the company?
Yeah, the company was started at some point in 2014, but for the first year or so, it was just me in a room. So really, 2015 on as a growing team of people. When we started the company, the idea was to build AI products to solve real-world problems, and the real-world problems that we found interesting were problems that had to meet three criteria. Number one, be gigantic. Number two, be very broken. And number three, have tons of data. And we stumbled upon this broadly defined customer experience or contact center world really by accident. I had a terrible, nearly 3-hour phone call one day with my cable provider, which made me realize if I'm unhappy, they must be unhappy too, because they paid someone to be on the phone with me for 3 hours. And did a little research, learned the world spends roughly $600 billion per year in call centers that people hate calling. And that seemed like a big, meaty problem to eradicate.
But you were thinking AI back in 2014?
Yeah.
How?
Poking the eye of the status quo. Well, no, it was interesting because it was, in some sense, I had worked in high-frequency trading prior to ASAPP. High-frequency trading, you're building machine learning models to make predictions in whatever markets you want to trade. So I really liked the technology. I didn't like that when you apply it in quantitative finance, there's a number that goes up or down depending on how you do. I wanted to apply that technology to build products that would solve real-world problems, and that was really a founding idea. The challenge for us was to find a problem worth solving. And you might say, well, why is in call center sounds pretty boring, and it is very boring. But it's also 3% of the U.S. workforce, so there's not that many problems that have that scale. For perspective, there's more money spent by enterprises in America in contact centers than they spend in storage, databases, cybersecurity combined. So it's just a gigantic black hole of money. And you can think of it as a three-legged stool. There's the enterprise that dislikes spending money. There's a customer that dislikes interacting with a company. And then there's the agent that on average has an attrition rate of 100% per year. So that agent's not a happy camper. So it's a fundamentally broken problem.
So let's go back then, Gustavo. 2014, let's say to 2017 or so, first 3 or 4 years, what were you dealing with, obviously, as a founder and entrepreneur? And maybe walk us through kind of step by step those years before we get into more.
Well, the problem with answering about those years is the ratio of mistakes to getting something right was like way out of proportion. Still pretty skewed and persistence of stupidity from time to time. But what was interesting is we had a very different proposition for customers than what they were dealing with. I mentioned half-jokingly that the world especially enterprise technology, since the invention of enterprise technology. That was a big milestone. From then until now, it's mostly been incrementalism. And this space in particular is one that has suffered from 2-3 decades of nothing but incrementalism. Everything is about kind of get half a percentage point better year after year, and that's celebrated as some great success. So at the time, we were saying 90% of the cost associated with this problem is people. What if we make your people better? If we build AI products that tell agents, in this case, what to say and what to do and augment away a bunch of their workflows. So for the first few years, when we did that, it was a fairly novel thing. We actually were using back then a tagline, make every agent your best agent. Everyone in our space now uses that tagline.
What was the, when did you first have revenue?
We had revenue. It was actually a very interesting story. I think very few people know the story. So our first year, our first week of really conceptualizing this, we said, who is the biggest spender of this? And we literally Googled who has the largest call centers in the country. And one of them was a shall-be nameless cable company in the East Coast. And I sent them a cold email. And I said, seems like you guys suck. And seems like you spend a lot of money in this problem. Would you want to talk? And they actually invited me. I met a very senior person. The company was 4 people at the time. So we had no capabilities to deliver what we were actually wanting to.
Cold email went to a senior person.
Yeah.
And they responded.
Yes.
You got to give them credit for that.
Or not, actually. I can argue the other side. They were delusional. And long story short, those conversations actually led to our first customer. Now, the part that's very interesting, it was our first customer, and it was a 7-digit deal, which for enterprise software, that's a pretty big deal. And in fact, it was going so well that towards the end of that year, they said, we want to do a multi-year renewal. And we put in front of them a $35 million multi-year renewal, which, again, we still had 1 customer. So they said, this is very interesting. The CEO, the vice chairman, the president, and the CTO of the company want to come visit you. At that time, we were, I don't know, 25, 30 people. And I said, great, come on over. So they get on a train. They come to our offices. And I think we were getting this $35 million deal. They thought we were getting this $35 million deal. It was amazing. And at the time, we were talking to 2 other prospects, one of the other largest cable companies and one of the largest wireless carrier companies in the country. And we were getting into very aggressively moving pursuits on the basis that that first company was working with us. And as this is unfolding, I get a call one day. I'm actually away on vacation. I get a phone call that says, the deal's off. I said, what do you mean the deal's off? Like, I guess we're just renewing the $1 million deal that we had instead of doing the 30. No, the deal's off. There's no more relationship between our companies. And I said, a week ago, the CEO of your company was here. You told me that they never visit company, which was true. The person that we were working with said, I've worked with this company for 14 years. The CEO's never gone visit a technology vendor, especially not a 35-person little startup. Well, the CEO came to the conclusion this was so critical that they needed to own it themselves and do it themselves and not give it to a third party. So we went from 1 customer, a very successful customer, to no customers. And I remember one of our board members called me at the time and said, this is pretty existential. And I'm thinking to myself, no shit. Of course, it's went from 1 customer to no customer. And the 2 likely customers were predicated on the fact so those were very uncomfortable phone calls to say, do you remember how I told you that we're working with them? Well, not so much anymore. Long story short, he says, the only way to make this non-existential is if you actually get those 2 customers, this is just a bump in the road. And we got those 2 customers and it moved on.
So let's move forward the clock a little bit. ASAPP today, how big, how many employees, where are you on funding and everything else?
Yeah, the company, we've invested about we've raised a little over $500 million most of that money has gone to R&D, and the reason is we want to break away from that incrementalism that I've described and fundamentally solve this problem. Now, what fundamentally solve this problem means for us is actually evolved over time. Like I said when we started, it was make these people better. Because if 90% of the cost is the human beings doing these workflows, and you make them, for example, 2x better, is the same as having gotten rid of half the money you spent on this problem. So for many, many years, that was our shtick, to try to make the people that worked here better. We are moving away from that in some sense towards the complete elimination of the people that do these things. Why? We've had kind of in the last couple of months some interesting breakthroughs that allow us to see you don't need to make the people better anymore. You're actually in a capability where you can completely automate all of this, which is a very interesting inflection point for us, because it's not about making it better, it's about curing this problem once and for all.
Is that, Gustavo, is that because of Gen AI and more of the developments that have happened over the last year or two versus where we were in 2014?
Sort of. In a sense, we had in production generative models since 2015, before the generative moniker existed. And these were models, language models, much smaller language models than the ones we see now, that were generating suggested responses for agents, collecting the feedback from the usage of those suggestions and predictions our models would make. So we've been in this game of building models for these vertical applications for much longer than most, if not all, folks out there have been at it. And through that period of time, we've collected a very large amount of data that is fairly unique, which is the data not just of the interactions, but what people do about the interactions when there's predictions relevant to those interactions. So that has allowed us in the last more recent times to train much larger models and then give those models autonomy to ping APIs autonomously or retrieve information from knowledge bases autonomously. And that's what essentially is breaking the mold of what's traditionally been rules-based systems in the call center world to fully generative interactions that are going to, again, in our humble view, make all agents disappear.
So let's say I'm that cable company and I have a call center with 500 people. How quickly will that be zero?
So it's funny. We had an offsite with our leadership team in December, and I asked our chief scientist, what do you think are the probabilities of between tomorrow and 5 years from now, all call centers have disappeared? He said, I think that probability is 100%. I think it's probably based on the speed of implementation at enterprise. I mean, you have plenty of experience working with large enterprises. I think in the next 2 to 5 years, there won't be any call centers left. Or if there are, they're significantly shrunk. So a 30,000 call center becomes a 300-person call center, or even smaller, perhaps.
What would the impact of this be for countries like India?
Well, probably not that great for a period of time. And again, here, 3% of the workforce. But these sort of things have happened before. They're by and large inevitable. You remember switchboard operators and elevator operators and horse carriage drivers, and there's ice cutters. There's all these roles that have existed in some cases. If you think of textile workers at a fairly voluminous scale, and they go away. There's some, and I think what's interesting, and we're very lucky, because kind of poking some fun at what I started with, challenging the status quo is all great, but if you think of SaaS, by and large, most of SaaS has been a better mousetrap. There's a V1 version of something, and someone makes it cloud-based, or has more features, or has a different pricing, whatever. It's just a better mousetrap, but the workflows are by and large the same. I think we have the privilege of being alive right now in a moment of time where capabilities that are at a point where we can make things fundamentally different and really transform things, and that's very exciting.
Yeah. So you're really talking about a step change, and more than a step change, even in terms of what you're going to be able to do going forward.
I think what we're going to do to call centers is what little panels with buttons did to elevator operators.
Good. That's good. Let me.
Unless you're a call center agent. But by the way, I said, half joking, you actually don't need to fire anybody because the attrition rate is already 100% per year. So you need to just stop rehiring, and that's it.
I get it. Let me go in a different direction, Gustavo. Obviously, you're a very successful entrepreneur. You've built a great company. Let me start with just being an entrepreneur today. Advice for the people in the room?
Don't do it. No, in a sense, it's actually good advice. Is don't do it unless you have a burning desire and are extremely mission-driven about a particular mission that doesn't let you sleep because of how consumed you are by it. If you have that sense of purpose, then by all means do that and nothing but that. But I think in some sense we've kind of celebrated entrepreneurship, which is a great thing to celebrate, but made it like a popular thing. I think we all know most companies don't succeed. And I would say a significant factor there is that lack of fire in your belly for a particular mission.
What do you see out there today in terms of the funding world? Obviously, a lot of that's changed over the last year or two.
Well, I'll give you a very interesting data point. So we've raised about a little over $500 million, which means we've had a few rodeos with the capital markets under our belt. Our Series C, which was done, I think, in 2019 or something like that, was about $120 million. It literally took about 24 to 48 hours to get done, where you kind of called a few people, you received interest and allocations, and then the lawyers did their work for the next 2 weeks, but it was literally a matter of days putting a sizable 9-digit financing together. We then had the pleasure of having to do our Series D last year, and not only last year, but like at the peak garbage period of time to do it. And it wasn't 24 or 48 hours. It was a much lengthier and much more difficult period of time. I think all in, that's a healthy thing. It is insane that you can round up 9 digits of capital in a few phone calls. Well, maybe you're, I don't know, Elon Musk, you've earned the credit to do it. The rest of us mere mortals should have to demonstrate an ability to deserve whatever it is that we want or need. And I think, by and large, there were many companies, and in many ways us, who operated with this addiction to capital markets, and it made you an inefficient, bloated, wasteful organization. And I think this reset is going to force entrepreneurs like myself and others to confront a reality where there's been a mean reversion to normalcy. And in that normalcy, you're either going to wake up, smell the coffee, operate more efficiently, or you're going to likely cease to exist. And I think that's profoundly a healthy thing. The last few years of crazy capital markets for private companies, I would think were not a healthy thing.
Yeah. Let me ask
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I totally agree with you. I think today you have to really show something to be able to get funding, which is where it needs to be. I agree. Too much exuberance in the last 3 or 4 years, for sure, especially coming out of COVID, for sure. What about, Gustavo, on the talent side? We're at EY, we've been going through ups and downs on talent. We have 400,000 people from all over the world, and our attrition rate post-COVID was 26, 27%, and now it's 7 or 8%. And I like to think because everyone wants to work at EY, but obviously there aren't that many jobs out there, and people aren't leaving for as much. What are you experiencing there in terms of talent?
So what's interesting about being in the software business is pretty much everything you do is about talent. Everything that we do, our output is a result of people's brains being aligned with whatever shared objectives we have. That makes people the number 1, 2, and 3 considerations in terms of how well you're going to do. So it's very much a people business. And by the way, a side effect of the exuberance that we've discussed is there were a bunch of mediocre organizations that would recruit people not by the purpose of their mission, but by the amount of compensation they would incur just to secure people. So I think we've had that dislocation. We've gone through. Historically, our attrition rate is probably hovered in the 10% range. And about 60% of that is initiated by us and 40% is involuntary. I think we saw at peak kind of COVID craze, that number nearly doubled to about 18%, which for us was very significant and somewhat unnerving if we had for 5 years not been used to that kind of level. And then you got to really think through, are you going to tactically deal with that, where compensation is maybe the most powerful lever, or are you going to more fundamentally address it? And fundamentally addressing that means, again, coming back to the mission. Why are we here, and why should you be here? And by the way, for an organization like yours, I think you have one of the most interesting points of time to not only retain people, but attract the best people, because you sit at a very unique position where this transformational opportunity, moment in time that we're living, it's companies like you that are going to make it happen and enable it for very large organizations. I think that purpose, for those who want to be mission-driven, is a very good thing.
Yeah, no, that's... Let me switch gears again. You have some views on the regulatory environment and the regulatory environment in the U.S. What do you see happening there? There's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. this week.
Yeah, relative to AI, I think these are all bad ideas. Regulating AI is sort of, I think an analogy has been made that it's sort of like regulating math. Like, what are you talking? You really have to not understand what you're talking about to suggest doing something like that. So, given where it's coming from, I can't say it's surprising, obviously. And I'll stick to my Montana view of the world in terms of where regulation needs to go, out the window.
It's funny, what we're seeing, it's, you know, in the U.S., I think right now, you know, everyone's still trying to figure out where to go with AI and regulation. In Europe, where Europe tends to lead with regulation.
By the way, lead is a misuse of the word. I think you can say, well, lead, yes, but lead implies leading, which is a positive thing. I think they lead in a negative way.
Oh no, it's definitely negative. Yeah, no, I was just going to say that. No, because it stifles innovation completely. Yeah. And so, you know, there's a whole group in the EU now that are coming together in terms of AI regulation. We've been debating on whether we want to be part of that group or not. It's a little bit of, if you're part of it, you can help mold it. If you're not, you're on the outside. But the fact that that's even happening is a negative for Europe.
Well, 100%. I mean, by the way, you're at 400,000 people and being EY, you have different political considerations that I have the benefit of not having to spend much time dealing or thinking about with. That said, imagine how wonderful it would be if they were thinking about how to foster innovation rather than how to regulate something they're currently not doing much in terms of innovating themselves. So it's just a crappy mental model.
Let me go back to your employees and so forth. You asked me earlier whether we were back in the office, and I gave you an answer of 3 days a week. What are you doing? What's your view there?
We're experimenting with it. I'll give you a very interesting observation. In the last month, so we're announcing this very cool new product in a few weeks that completely automates contact centers. And as a result of that, I've been doing a bit of a world tour we have offices in India and Latin America, and I've been visiting those teams for the first time since COVID, actually. What's interesting is there's somewhat of an interesting gap between our teams outside of the U.S. and our teams in the U.S. And I think it has to do primarily with entitlement. Our teams in India and Argentina, for example, are eager to go back, eager to see each other, eager to work with one another, eager to do all these wonderful things. And I would say in the United States, it's split in a way that you don't see elsewhere. And you get reactions, well, where if you mandate back to work, I don't know that this works for me. And my thinking is, wonderful, thanks for telling me, and it's a wonderful self-selection device. And by the way, I think there are good things with having an open mind in terms of hybrid nature of work or allowing people some flexibility. I think obviously that works, but there's something special. Like the answer I gave you when we brought that up. Imagine this session over Zoom. Would you be as delighted with the jokes we're making, or would you be checking your... So that same silly dynamic of attention and bringing the same in the room happens at work, and I think that's very important.
That's interesting. Do you find it, because we've talked a little bit about this, we found it that our young people want to be in the office. It's the mid-level people that don't really want to be.
They're entitled.
And for us, yeah, they're entitled, that's true.
They're flashing us.
They're flashing us on the time? Yes. Yeah. But anyway, so, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. This is awesome. Congratulations on ASAPP.
Congratulations.
We're all excited to hear what you're going to announce in 3 weeks. And that sounds like it's an exciting time. Congratulations. Thank you.